Hi, everyone. We started a bit late since that last chat was pretty great. It was about 90 minutes. So we just let everyone just decompress and we'll kick off again. My name's John. I'll be moderating these two beautiful men. I'm a core contributor at SafeDAO. Previously Gnosis Safe, but now we've rebranded as Safe, where we want to be credibly neutral and launch a DAO. So it's a newly established DAO. And yeah, I'm just really the main purpose of this. I just want to get into the future of DAOs, maybe talk a little bit about SafeDAO since these two have affiliated and contributed to the DAO before, but really just get into the future mechanisms around how to make DAO resource allocation make sense and actually work. Because we've seen, even in the last panel, that what we discussed is that DAOs are a great way to kind of piss away resources, right? And not really allocate resources appropriately and end up losing out to centralized focused teams. So yeah, I kind of want to get into that around the mechanisms and around how we can improve this for the future. But for now, I'll let the two guys introduce themselves to what they're doing right now and what they're all about in terms of DAOs. So Joel, Shikai.
Sure, yeah. So what I've been interested in recently is sort of attribution in Web3 and how that can feed into various sorts of reward systems.
Before you dive in, do you want to just introduce yourself, Joel?
I'm just like, this is what I've been thinking about. I'm not going to dive into that too much now.
Cool.
But yeah, I work on a project called Ceramic, and we essentially build data infrastructure for Web3. So like any sort of data you wouldn't put on-chain, like financial stuff, you put on Ceramic. Anything else you want me to tell about myself?
I mean, go for it. I say go to where you're talking about what's getting you interested now in the space.
Yeah, I'm really interested in like sort of funding things that are hard to fund, so like public good or like anti-rivalrous resources, and just like thinking of new ways of building feedback loops rather than just like the ICO or like VC route. I think that's really fascinating, and like actually tying that into like some sort of like contribution graph.
Scott?
Hi everyone, my name is Shikai, and I one of the co-founders of Longhash Ventures. I guess on this panel, I value the plurality because I represent the other side, like the Asia angle, the business side of things, the finance side of things, often painted as evil. But we do have quite a unique perspective. I think I've been on kind of all sides of the table. So we have our own fund. So we do invest in startups and some DAO tooling infrastructure, including SafeDAO. Very happy to support that. We run an accelerator. So we support projects on like how to then raise funds, how to grow, how to think about decentralization. And at the same time, we are also contributing to DAOs as our own like individuals and as an entity. So personally, I've been contributing to the Balancer DAO right now, specifically with Orb Collective and with SafeDAO as well. Very happy to contribute as a Safe Guardian and a couple of venture DAOs going on so different types as well.
Yeah. Awesome. I kind of want us to get into like how we're going to move forward with the DAO model. I think this DAO space has come under a bit of criticism recently. It becomes the scope of a DAO becomes bloated, and it doesn't perform as well as, to say, a centralized team. Or the argument is a centralized team with a focused leader can actually do a lot more than a newly set up DAO with a decentralized focus and an attempt at being an autonomous organization. So I kind of want to pick both your brains on like who should really follow with the DAO model and what is the main advantage over centralized teams with a clear leader and a clear focus.
All right. So we work with a lot of early stage founders, and one of the questions that always comes up is, should we make this a DAO, right? And if so, like when should we do it and how should we do it? And often the answer is. Often the question is also like, how should we decentralize? And I like to say that that's the wrong question to ask, right? Rather than trying to say that's the end goal, it's really what are you crowdsourcing that is more efficient in a decentralized way, right? So what are you crowdsourcing? There's a more efficient decentralized way. So if it comes to like core product development and you know the problem really well, you know your product and your code base really well, to expect that other people to come in and suddenly like be able to contribute at the same level as you guys is kind of unrealistic, right? But once you get to a certain MVP level, and let's say now, hey, actually, I need some users, I need some feedback, or maybe I need some integration partners, I need to create some content, I need to localize it to different areas. These are then areas that like, hey, actually, it doesn't make sense for me to, maybe I don't know the Chinese market and the Chinese language, or maybe I don't know like your need as an integrator. Let's say you're building a DAO infrastructure, and then you're like, oh, actually, this particular type of DAO, and like you need to customize it for that purpose. So for those kind of angles where they have then like more specialized knowledge, then it makes sense to then decentralize that, and through that be able to do things that you were not able to do, and then to be able to then recognize those contributions through ownership, and then eventually hopefully some sort of revenue share wherever that comes in as well.
Anything to add, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think DAOs are really applicable anywhere you want to do some sort of cooperation between two or more people. And I think DAOs DAOs might not be the right word for all of those things, but I think like what we today call a DAO could be useful for all those things. So we could have like just a traditional organization on chain that just does whatever traditional organization does, but it's on chain. You can like do certain things more efficiently. You can do it more effectively across borders where like countries might not even agree on things. And so I think that that's a valid use case. I don't think we should dismiss that, but it's not the most interesting one. And I think like now people are starting to experiment with not having everything go through the sort of, there's a treasury of the DAO, and then there's a vote, and that creates this like bottleneck. And that's sort of been one of the big problems. And people have tried like various different ways to get around this. And no one has really succeeded. Like, how can we make the throughput of the decisions of the treasury faster? I think that's the wrong question to ask. Some people are starting now to like experiment, like breaking up sub DAOs and things like that. That could be an option that probably will work in some cases. But I wonder if there's other ways we can just like create, rather than creating tools for just like coordination on specific things all the time, we just create tools for cooperation towards some kind of more diffuse goal that is not necessarily we need to make a bunch of decisions as the whole organization at one point in time all the time. There's like various ways we can just collaborate without friction. And I think there's still a pretty big design space open around that we haven't explored yet.
I definitely want to get into that point more, Joe, but I'll just say from like from the safe and the Gnosis safe perspective, why we went the DAO route. Like Gnosis safe, it's a well-established multi-sig primitive now going forward, and we got like we achieved significant adoption that we got like 40 billion TVL locked, and we said, okay, how do we not be tyrants, or how do we prevent us being kind of like tyrannical people managing this protocol going forward? And that's why we DAO'd essentially. Like, I think DAOs are a proper way to prevent tyranny and actually become credibly neutral and promote a standard. So I think when like Joel and Shikai made very super valid points, and I think one additional point is if you're looking to be a standard and if you want to be credibly neutral in that pursuit of that standard, then a DAO gives you that ability to coordinate, a permission, not permissionless, I'm not going to say that word again, get public participation involved in your standard and not, fall under the realms of what corporate hierarchies have done in the past where, they get this leader that ends up making decisions that probably, affect scarce resources in a bad way, Anyway, tying into what Joel was talking...
just on that point, right? Yeah. I think Safe DAO is in a really interesting spot, right? I think as many of us pointed out, because Safe has achieved that product market fit. And so we're at that point where like you don't want to be the tyrant and you want to be like anti-fragile, resilient. You want to have those checks and balances because it's now so important that you don't want it to be just captured by a small group of people. Whereas like a lot of projects not yet have that luxury, right? Just to keep that context in mind.
No, absolutely, and I think that kind of ties into like from being a product that had product market fit going into a DAO, or just being just a normal, like, trying to achieve normal organization trying to achieve product market fit, I think you have to look at your operating model surrounding your DAO in the first place. Otherwise, you kind of run the risk of what the last panel was talking about, is just, exhausting resources and throwing money at experimentation, and eventually not actually, achieving the North Star you originally wanted for whatever you're trying to achieve. So, Joel,
and the point around like standards is also really interesting. Like there's sort of two different approaches to standards. One is like, okay, there's a bunch of companies that don't know that they want to make something, and they come together and design it together. Or like one of the companies come up with a proposal, and then they sort of like tease things out and design it together. The other approach is sort of, let's just build a wildly successful product, and then that's sort of just becomes a de facto standard. I think SafeDAO maybe like lands somewhere in the middle where it is successful, but then like open it up for like community collaboration. And I think that's like a new path that has been unlocked with DAOs and like the Web3 ecosystem in general, that we can actually like make something that work, and then sort of just like open it up if it wasn't like open from the start, of course.
No, 100%. I want to just get your thoughts on like just operating models for DAOs in general, because it's like an under researched area, I believe, just from a DAO context particularly. We talk about product management and we talk about corporate governance, but I want to talk about just setting operating models and seeing new operating models for DAOs emerge. For example, like SafeDAO, we're looking at outcome-based resource allocation, where unless you fall under this North Star KPIs that we're trying to achieve, you're not going to get any backing on a proposal. And you rigorously set your goals and KPIs, the strategies to achieve those goals and KPIs, and then initiatives following. So, yeah, that's one example. Optimism, look at, profit equals impact, retroactive funding on whatever impact you made. So, yeah, how are you guys applying your thinking right now into operating models, or what operating models are exciting you, or do you think it's an important thing in general?
Yeah, for sure. I think the outcome based is definitely a very good step for many DAOs, right? One thing that a lot of DAOs lack is that central North Star, or that mission that you were talking about. So I think the recent ones that have started off with that, right, with SafeDAO, with like ENS, for example, at the Constitution, when you first claim the token, helps a lot, because once you establish that North Star, then it makes sense to flow down to, okay, now here are the strategies, right? And here are the specific initiatives that can serve those strategies. Whereas in the more chaotic experimentation phase in the past, we've looked at a lot of proposals, and it's like, fund marketing here, fund product development here, and like fund some human resource here. And without that overarching mission to tie everyone together, you end up making these debates at the proposal level, which then wastes a lot of time, because then you're like, if you already aligned it beforehand, like, and you can just check, hey, does this align? Yes. Okay, is this reasonable? All right, let's do it. And we also have a very clear way to then determine proactive post the event whether you actually achieve those outcomes and those KPIs. So that being said, I think Obra works very well for when you're trying to fund new initiatives and you really have a very clear kind of like bottom line that you want to achieve, right? And you have like certain KPIs that you want to track. On the other hand, like going back to the context of SafeDAO as a more mature product, right? What about like for earlier stage when we talk about like product development, and that's a lot harder to then decentralize, and it's also a lot harder to determine the outcome, right? If I'm building a new feature, the TVL or the revenue doesn't come in instantly after I built that feature. I just know that I shipped it, right? So how do we decide whether to even ship this product, and like who should be the right ones to ship this product? I think that part still is not yet fully figured out. I really like what some of the experimentations have been doing with like Sushi and Yearn, but then it seems that also falls kind of short, a little bit too chaotic. So we're looking for somewhere in the middle ground for that. And also the other part is, what about the more administrative parts, right? Like, so outcome-based resource allocation is very good when you want to invest in new kind of, I think the previous panel was talking about like nucleated ideas that are very clear, and you can eventually spin off as maybe even a new venture, and then you feed back to the parent DAO as like tokens and so on. But there are certain things that need to go on as kind of like business as usual. So things like maybe some sort of administratively, let's say you want to do reporting of the treasury and you want to manage the treasury, or maybe you want to think about meta governance. These are how do you determine outcome of meta governance, right? It's a lot harder to do. So on that side as well, perhaps one answer is to then like have multiple service DAOs, service proposals compete for this kind of like meta governance, treasury management. So some parts it makes sense to then do this like very strict funding. Some parts it makes sense to make it do like open tender, where like, okay, here's something we're not too sure, but let's see what the ideas are. And some parts maybe even like arguably not ready to be decentralized, like let's say product development, and you need a long time for people to build up some sort of reputation and context and know-how in like your specific like product before you do that.
I mean, as you're gathering your thoughts there, Joel, like as we look at operating models for like product DAOs, operating models for like DAOs targeting standards, or just service DAOs in general, like what mechanisms can we put in place in order to make sure you're doing the right thing, or your operating model is doing the right thing, and it's not just chaotic post, you set your North Star. So yeah, another kind of additional question.
Yeah, we don't want to have a DAD, like a decentralized autonomous disorganization.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to like actually answer that question in general, because a product DAO probably needs to have more something look like a product team versus like a protocol DAO. Probably just want to build out the core protocol and actually like fund different products on top of it. And so the strategy and like approach is probably like very different. I mean, I've been thinking about like sort of a more mechanistic approach to organizing like an open group of people where, oh, that's light. Where if you can actually look at a graph of contributors over time, and you can know that you can attribute different pieces of like maybe a proposal, maybe a forum comment, and just look at this graph and start to distribute tokens based on that, or distribute rewards based on that, and do that in a mechanistic way. You can sort of like create this sort of like impact function. But you need to be very sure that this is like the right impact function if you do something like that. So there are different projects that have experimented with something like this. You have like source cred, you have Giveth, they have praise, you have coordinate. This is like different ways of like having a graph of contributions or like evaluations about the people in the DAO, and then just like reward. And in some cases that's more like for interpersonal things. But I think you can also do that on like, hey, this proposal that you did actually had a big impact, and just like reward based on that. I think that's, if you can get something like that right for your DAO, you can probably accelerate way faster than any other DAO, because people can just look at the mechanism and project sort of like into the future what will happen, because they can see, okay, this mechanism will go distribute this many tokens for this many years, and so I can base long-term actions based on that. But doing that for something that's more soft is not really something that's feasible right now. But probably for some sort of like subtypes of DAO, we can sort of experiment with this sort of thing.
As like Joel, as like as a founder of a core protocol in this Web3 space, and for Shikai, like someone who incubates founders to to achieve like what Balancer is doing with like the vested token initiatives, are you quite bearish on product DAOs particularly, or in terms of like products trying to find product market fit and bringing a DAO along with them and DAOing too early? Like, are you bearish on that concept, or what do you think about that in terms of products trying to achieve product market fit?
yeah, I think it has come through. Generally, quite. I think product is should be one of the last things to decentralize. So we're big fans of progressive decentralization, and so when we look at early stage teams, we generally say that, hey, look, maybe on the distribution side, like on like how do you get users and how do you get partners, that could be the first thing to decentralize. And then you start to then think about like some of the more economic things, then resource allocation with like grants or venture funding for like complementary products or strategic initiatives. And then at the last point, then we start talking about meta governance and core products. In my opinion, these should be the last things to decentralize. But it doesn't mean that we can't get input from the community and your partners, right? It's just that it's a lot faster to go and like try it out and validate and iterate, right? Rather than like getting a consensus from everybody from an efficiency standpoint. But as you grow and you become a significant protocol, then it becomes not a matter of like how efficient it is, right? And then it becomes like, okay, how resilient I need to be and how like neutral I need to be. So then the product DAO is kind of like, to me, product DAO shouldn't like focus too much on product. It should eventually be, how do you then like keep all the stakeholders protected and valued and appreciated, and continue to grow the value creation around the core product. So in the short answer, yes, bearish product DAOs as like a decentralized development perspective. I think it's gonna, with product DAOs specifically, it's gonna trend towards a lot more similar to what we've seen in traditional software teams, like agile teams. You sprint and you like ship stuff and you go and test it out and iterate. But then the more kind of like what we think of as DAOs is going to be when you have that scale.
So what in your mind is not a product DAO?
So well, actually, right now, Safe DAO, I would say it's not really a product DAO, right? When we're talking about like growing the Safe Apps ecosystem, it's more like resource allocation, because now we're trying to like fund initiatives or new projects that can grow adoption, right? So venture DAOs, I think, very very clear model. Service DAOs are also not a product, right? Because you are finally selling your time and expertise. So what Fire Eyes is doing, I wouldn't say they're a product DAO, right? They're trying to like gather the best talent and then maybe pool together their knowledge, like share their experiences, grow that repository, and align people who feel that they want to contribute to the mission, but you're not building a core product. Yeah. So for those, I think it makes a lot more sense. There's all sorts as well, right? Like social DAOs, those NFT brands that, that are coming up. But I think we're starting to see a lot more, not just product.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. But I would actually like wonder if like SafeDAO is actually, the product of SafeDAO is like sort of the safe smart contracts, and then people are building apps on this, but it's still sort of like a protocol as a product, right?
Yeah. No, exactly, right? Like, so it's kind of that transitions like protocol DAO or product DAO, right? Ultimately, like, so yeah, I see it as protocol DAO, of course, but of course there's also like, guardians or other big participants in the DAO that are also trying to, magnify their product as well on top of the protocol, and actually, achieve, like, gain funding from that as well.
I guess maybe it's useful to distinguish between like a end user product and like a product that's for developers.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, correct, exactly. And it would be ultimately this protocol, the safe protocol, and like the safe the interfaces and the infrastructure services are for developers building on top of this and actually achieving, a multi-sig standard as well as a ownership standard, right? That builds on top of multi-sig, to actually achieve some, decentralized adoption of Web3. Yeah, just I wanted to ask you, just in terms of the future, like for the future of DAOs, what particular research area or like idea has you excited about the future of DAOs? Like, or like, what are you putting your kind of headspace into right now, for that will actually, positively, impact DAOs now in the future of them?
So there's this one example from the Web2 world actually that makes me really excited about DAOs, and this is something that happened on a Reddit forum, and it's not Wall Street Bets. it's actually it's actually so I think SpaceX put up some like competition, like, hey, come up with the best sort of like technical plan for how to build a hyperloop, and the number 2 scoring team came second in this competition, which is like r/engineering or something like that. Like, it was a subreddit of these like engineers in their free time, just like, oh, let's just do this thing, and they just like put something together, and like they worked really hard probably, but they managed to build this thing and finished second in this competition where there was like a bunch of VC funded companies that were just like trying to win this prize. And to me, that's like really inspiring for what we can achieve in the DAO space, but what we haven't yet been able to do.
Absolutely. I really echo that. I feel that exactly as you said, right? When there is a strong like objective or goal or mission, and you're able to then like crowdsource input, then it makes a lot more sense, right? Then decentralizing is a lot more effective. So that is one way to do it, where you already define like, okay, I have this specific problem. What are all the engineering methods, or like what are all the, let's say, cryptography methods to then like achieve that goal? What I'm really excited about is what I'm calling, well, proof of contribution, right? And in a way, it is that. So when you can define a particular thing and you can verify that the solution is addressing what you're looking for, then you can effectively harness the energy of a lot more people. So I think, for example, the truly DAOs, right, will be something like, let's say, Filecoin, where you're saying, hey, here are the tokenomics. When you commit your storage space and you stake your fill tokens, and you can show the proof of that, hey, I've made the storage space available, then it is truly permissionless on like who can actually come and just like spin up data servers, or like whoever can cheaply acquire hardware to do storage. We need that for DAOs. Right? We need a way to make it like standardized contributions and make it verifiable, so that you don't need that central group of like grant allocators or like reviewers and delegates to say that, oh yeah, actually you did your job, right? Yeah, so that's more of the manual decision universe, right? I think we have too few of like the automated, like actual DAO kind of provable mechanisms out there. And I'm hoping to see more of that in the sense of, let's say, data DAOs, right? Let's say, what kind of data can I crowdsource? Or like, let's say, to do with like intersections of something like AI, where like, hey, maybe I can help like tag something, and like I'm already contributing this whole open source AI model. I mean, just some wild ideas out there. But right now we're very focused on the human organization part. But then that's not to say that on the human side there's nothing interesting as well. I think everybody's talking about SBTs and VCs and DIDs, right? And that is indeed a frontier for then the human side, the discretionary side. Like, how do we then have a more granular view? What is your expertise? What have you actually contributed to, and what are outcomes of like what you have done so far? And using that as input, so that it's not just a token-based voting, right? And I think quadratic and VE tokenomics are some ways conviction voting. These are some ways to kind of address that, but social gives it a whole new dimension that you did not have before. So I think a combination of those two, right? Like protocol level proof of contribution with like social-based, kind of identities can then grow this a lot.
Yeah, this is sort of what I was trying to get at before. And I think with the SAFE sort of as a foundation, we could actually do something pretty cool where if we record our like discussions and like issue tracking and things in some sort of like verifiable data substrate, and then we have some sort of like initial set of sort of DAO members or contributors in the sort of multisig, and we plug that into I think Zodiac has this module that's sort of like an oracle that's called Reality.
Yep. Formerly SafeSap and now Reality. Yeah. So it's
right, and you can plug that into, so oracles in general, like, yeah, it's very subjective, but if you plug the oracle and point it at a verifiable data source, then you actually make the arbitration very easy if the oracle is to like do something wacky. Yeah. You can just like, oh, the oracle took this data and said, this is the result, but it's actually something else. And we can like sort of solve that problem socially, depending on the context. But we have a much better way of argue about like whether or not the Oracle did the right thing. And hopefully in most cases, we can just like do some sort of like evaluation over this data set, whether it's like direct contributions in their issue tracker and project management tool, or some sort of like praise like they have in Giveth, where people just give praise to each other, or a combination of these, and take reality yet, just point that, and then have outcomes or token distributions from the safe. I think that could be like a very cool primitive.
Super cool.
Yeah, exactly. So I think to tie it back as well, on a more practical level, exactly as you said, and thanks for bringing up Zodiac, is then how do we get there, right? Is to have that progression that you can progressively go, right? You start off a multi-sig and, hey, I can recognize people's contributions on Discord or like just in the group chat. And later on having some form of like voting on Snapshot or on Zodiac itself that recognizes like some form of social contribution. And then eventually when you're ready to make that like fully on-chain, then maybe you become a protocol. Maybe you have your own app chain or app-based rollup that actually at the validator level can actually prove that you have done that contribution. So
that gets into like the escalation game of oracles, right? Like, because you have to set a bond that this outcome or this contribution actually did happen, and you have a kind of game theory based escalation of who's speaking the truth and who's not, right? Which gets very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how much resources you want to throw at it, if you can have all the data be verifiable and like anchored into the chain periodically. So Ceramic, the protocol that I work on, actually does this. You could, in theory, build a system that rolls up this entire computation in a zero knowledge proof, or use a sort of like TrueBit sort of system that's like similar to what optimistic rollups do, with like this sort of like binary search arbitrage game, and get rid of sort of the Oracle problem a little bit. But then you need to throw a lot of resources at the problem. So like I think that sort of like semi-Oracle approach is probably like a decent in between until we have sort of way better systems for do this kind of big computations.
100%. Oren, he couldn't make it today, but I think he's attending this event like later on this evening, just to drinks. But Zodiac are now also working on a zero knowledge voting as well. So as a result of like, the recent DAOs that have been under regulatory scrutiny over which token voters voted on which outcome, even just adding zero knowledge to the actual like, snapshot voting or whatever oracle you end up using, I think that's also going to be super powerful with this kind of contributions-based, escalation roll-up that we're talking about here. So that's going to be a very powerful toolkit as we go in, it's just exciting, I think, for contribution DAOs or just DAOs that want to measure what their contributors are doing, And does anybody have any questions just on that? Happy just to open out to the crowd here. Or just general questions as well. I just want to check the time. Yeah.
So first of all, congrats with the launch of the Safe DAO. I'm wondering, what are you guys planning to build in terms of the products around the Safe contracts?
Yeah, I think ultimately we need a way to solve this multi-chain problem in terms of, we're like the smart contract problem around you deploy a smart contract on one chain, right? We're a smart contract wallet. How is that replicated? How is that state replicated across chain? And how do we stop, even technical users sending funds to a smart contract that does not exist on one chain, assuming that it existed on a chain, or just mistakenly send that? And that's a big problem. And I think that's for just, account abstraction and for smart contract wallets in general, we need a way to solve that. And I think that's a big research area that SafeDAO would allocate resources to, just to solve from a smart contract wallet perspective. And people are talking about, these like different kind of trustless bridges, like layer 1.5s essentially, where you have like a ZK bridge or a ZK protocol that kind of connects all these bridges together. Or you end up doing a DYDX approach where you create a DApp chain which is an underdeveloped area of research. It'll be interesting to see, but I think regardless, we don't want to leap before we actually look at this problem and look at the solutions properly. So we're just going to be allocating a lot of resources to the research of this multi-chain problem and how to solve it from a safe context as well as a smart contract wallet context, because we want other EVM chains implementing account abstraction, and we want smart contract wallets to be enabled across EVM and even non-EVM. But for now, I think that's a additional scope on the actual problem itself. Joel or Shikai, anything that you would like to see like SafeDAO allocate resources? Because I think like you're both guardians, you're both contributors to the SafeDAO, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on where our outcome-based resource allocation should go.
Sure. Well, I think the multi-chain infrastructure or cross-chain infrastructure is super interesting. I think a lot of room for also application level kind of apps on Gnosis Safe itself, right? So there are a lot of thoughts around like how do you do insurance/recovery? How do you then like plug it into different types of like DAO tools? But then I think the trap there is that if people might be thinking too general and be like, oh, I'm going to be like the one-stop shop for like everything. So I would say specifically like customizing the Gnosis Safe experience for, let's say, NFTs, or like for like gaming projects, or for like social groups that just want to come together, or for like venture DAOs. All these, there's so much room for you to then like build businesses or projects, or like maybe even new protocols on top of these. And then like even from like the DAO perspective, so generally a lot of it like multi-sig solves it. But then there are other things you want to do, right? Once you have multi-sig, what kind of applications you want to use for that? So treasury management, and like what does that mean, right? Well, for different types of DAOs, you have different like treasury management approaches, that different risk appetites, different products that you might want to use. So that's a huge use case there. How do you then integrate more seamlessly into different applications that can be on different chains as well, right? Like if I want to have a governance proposal on this chain, or like a multi-sig transaction on this chain, and then like execute like my treasury allocation on a different chain, or like deploy new code on a different chain. So the whole multi-chain applications are boundless.
Yeah, I feel like I lack too deep of an insight to like provide something super meaningful. But one thing that I've noticed, and maybe you have something for this, but just today I've heard about one or two projects that are building on the safe contracts that I didn't know about. And like, is there some like directory of sort of Gnosis Safe, like safe front ends or like different apps? I haven't seen that. Maybe there is. The other thing is just like decentralizing part of the infrastructure. So like right now, I know that there's like this transaction server that keeps track of like the sort of unspent transactions in the safe, and that could be like sort of fairly straightforwardly decentralized. There might be other parts of the stack as well, but yeah, those some things come to mind.
Just two things on that. One, I think we need to do a better job of really kind of fostering an ecosystem. So what we're going to be updating in our own safe interfaces now is, having a portal to SafeDAO from our interfaces, and also having a portal to all the other projects that are raising capital and building on top of the safe contracts and actually optimizing for a use case. For example, Prism raised I think 12 million to optimize for NFTs on top of the safe contracts. CoinShift raised 16 million to optimize for treasury management on top of the safe contracts. So we want to provide a kind of better landing page within our own interface to promote that, and to promote projects building and just optimizing for use cases across Web3, and just optimizing for decentralized use cases as well, and not becoming moats. And the second thing that you mentioned, Joel, there around like decentralizing transaction service, this is definitely like it's on that roadmap to progressive decentralization for like SafeDAO to really achieve what it's meant to achieve. In a way, we have to make it as easy to set up a transaction service or an indexer as setting up a validator, on Ethereum, which is actually quite tough right now as well. So we're trying to kind of democratize that and make that simpler to do. Yearn Finance actually run their own indexer right now, but they're supercharged. Like they're really, really knowledgeable on this. And we need to kind of create a way that it's not so complicated and that any kind of project can run their own transaction indexer or service and talk to our service. So you essentially, in our interface, choose what transaction service you want to use, or even abstract that away, and only the projects can actually get into that level of detail if they like. So it's on the roadmap, but it's kind of like what Ethereum are doing with democratizing validators. It'll take time to get that context.
Actually, CoinShift, I think, is trying to do that as well. They call it like if Gnosis Safe is a layer 0, then they're like the kind of layer 0.5 or layer 1 that actually has that kind of decentralized whole like signing consensus. So yeah, definitely. I mean, those are things that anyone can build as well. Yeah, and in fact, maybe we should have different implementations at different providers, much like how you would want to have different liquid staking kind of providers, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's kind of like the early stages, of Ethereum, where it was very hard to just actually, run a proof of work miner, or run a proof of stake validator, or run on Lido DAO, for example, which has gotten a lot simpler. So I think it's just making that a lot simpler to do, because right now it's quite complex and we need to democratize that, to set up. Anything else, guys? Question wise, or anything to shill from Joel and Shikak? I think we'll go to questions. Chill away, guys.
Chill away.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Representing more of the evil VC side. if anybody is looking for funding, though, and I know people like to bootstrap and think about fair launches, but reality is some people do need funding, and we are here to provide that. So if you are looking to join in our accelerator as a very early stage project, or if you're already more mature and you want some VC funding, and we can add value through either our accelerator or our network, our own support as well. So please reach out to me. Yeah, I'd love to work with you.
Any alpha, Joel?
I guess I already mentioned this, but various tools like on top of verifiable data. I think especially in the safe ecosystem, but in general DAO ecosystem as well. Ceramic can provide that sort of infrastructure. And then we can start building these sort of like reality oracles. So you like look at this verifiable data and produce some output on chain. I think like that sort of thing is super interesting.
It's what this Web3 ecosystem does well, is putting stuff on chain and then actually agreeing on what's on chain. So
so just like start building issue trackers, project management tools, discussion forums, and stuff like that. And then we can build these aggregation layers.
Thank you both. Awesome. That was awesome. And yeah,
thank you.
Get onto us, guys. Like, we want to chat about this 100% in terms of not even in the safe DAO context, but just a DAO kind of coordination context of how to actually verifiably prove contributions and actually create an operating model that works rather than losing out to centralized teams. Thank you.